2024-25 FAFSA online. A couple of things to note. The path that we'll be following today is for a dependent student with married parents who filed a joint tax return with each other. So you will be able to see the experience for the student as well as for a parent contributor. I do want to point out before we get started that this website is still a work in progress. And so the text that you see on each page is still subject to change. But for the most part, what you see here is very much what you will be seeing when we launch the application in December. So let's begin by assuming that I, as the student, Raya Tran, have logged in to the studentaid.gov website, and I have chosen to start a new FAFSA form. So I will be taken to the new FAFSA homepage, which you can see here. And from this page, which includes information about deadlines, as well as a video, some frequently asked questions, and some general FAFSA information, I'm going to select to start a new form. Now, at this point, I need to identify the role that I'll be playing in this FAFSA. Am I starting the FAFSA as a student or as a parent? And as I mentioned, I'm going to be starting the application as the student, so I will select student and then continue. And I'll now be taken through a series of pages that we refer to as onboarding. Basically, we are providing some basic information about what to expect with the FAFSA experience. And on this first screen, we're defining what the FAFSA actually is. On the next screen, we talk about contributors. Contributors are a new term for the 24-25 application cycle. And a contributor can be a parent spouse, student, or a student spouse. So there's information about what a contributor actually is and some information about how to invite a contributor in the event that one is required. We also provide information on this page about documentation that you might need in order to complete the questions on the FAFSA form. Continuing from here takes us to the what to expect page. This gives a general estimate of how long the application process will take. And provides some general information about new requirements, such as the requirements for each contributor to provide consent for their federal tax information to be transferred from the IRS into the FAFSA form. And the last of the onboarding pages provides information about what will happen next. We think it's important to set expectations clearly at the beginning. Unfortunately, too many people submit the FAFSA form and have an unrealistic expectation that the final screen will be an award letter from every school they've selected to send their information to. We all know that that's not what actually happens. So here we're letting them know approximately how long it will take for the form to process, what will happen after processing is complete. We'll calculate the student aid index and send the FAFSA submission summary information to the student. And then schools will use the information that they receive in order to determine eligibility at their school, and then they will communicate that information to the student. So that's the information that we are providing in our onboarding. And from here, I'm going to select Start the FAFSA form in order to start answering the questions. So on this first screen, we have our basic student identity information and contact information. And all of the information that's displayed here has been pulled directly from the student, Raya Tran, my FSA ID account. So when I logged into studentaid.gov with my FSA ID, all of this information about me carried into the application. So my identity and my email address and phone number is all displaying and it's not editable on this page. If any of this information is incorrect or needs to be updated, I can do that by selecting account settings, and that will take me to my account where I can update the information. That updates it in my FSA ID account, and then when I return to the FAFSA, it pulls the updated information in as well. You can see below the line here, we have the address information, and this also pulls from my FSA ID account. but it is editable. So in the event I want to use a different address on the FAFSA than what I have in my FSA ID account, I can do that by making the changes here. I'm going to continue. And the next screen is capturing my state of legal residence. You can see that the state is pre-filled. That is pre-filled with the state that's part of my mailing address, but I can change it. And then we have the state of legal residence date question, and you can see the way that it is phrased. It's including the state of legal residence in the question so that it's clear what we're actually asking for here. I'm just going to go ahead and select a random date, and then I'm going to continue from here. It is a requirement for every contributor to the FAFSA form to provide their consent in order for us to pull their information directly from the IRS and then disclose it to schools and state grant agencies. So this is where that collection of consent is actually happening for the student. You can see that we have the highlights here in this green box. So basically, we'll be pulling information from the 2022 tax year. That information is used to determine the student's eligibility for federal student aid, and it's required in order to complete the FAFSA form. You can see above the green box, we're very clear that if you don't provide consent, you will be ineligible for federal student aid. That is a requirement that comes from the Future Act. We do allow the student to proceed without providing consent, but we are very clear here and through various messages along the way that if that's a choice that they make, that we will not be calculating their eligibility. So we will allow them to submit the form. They will have to manually provide their tax information, and at the end, there will be no calculation of eligibility. So below this green box, we have the legal language that explains all of the important details about what consent is and what it means to provide it. And then we have a handful of frequently asked questions. Probably the most important one is this first one, which is who should provide consent? Because what if I didn't file a tax return? Or what if I filed a tax return in a foreign country? Or what if I don't have a social security number? The answer to all of those questions is it doesn't matter. You are required to provide consent. We want everybody to approve. In the event that a student chooses to decline providing consent, we will let them know once again that doing that will make them ineligible for federal student aid, and we'll give them another opportunity to change their mind and provide consent. And that's what I'm going to do. And that takes me to the beginning of the next section, which is personal circumstances. So the questions that you'll see in this section are used to determine dependency status. However, unlike in the past where we were able to hide questions that were no longer needed to determine dependency because we'd already determined somebody was independent, that's no longer the case. We're required to ask all of these questions. And so instead of calling these questions the dependency questions, we're referring to them as personal circumstances because in some cases they're not actually being used to determine dependency. For example, if I logged in as a 40-year-old student, I'm already independent, but these questions will still display for me. So before each section in the form, we have an introductory page that sets some context for the kinds of questions that will be asked in that section, and that's what you see here. And from here, I will continue. And the first question we have is asking about my marital status. So one of the changes for the 24-25 year is that we have separated every marital status out into its own individual response option. I'm going to select single, never married, and continue. And this next screen is asking information about my college or career school plans. So this first question is asking about my grade level. This question is used for two purposes. One is as a determination of independency. If I were to select this last option, then I would be an independent student. But it's also used to help determine loan limits. And we'll use this information to provide expected loan limits on the output document that we send to the student. I'm going to indicate that I am a first-year freshman, And then the next question is asking if I already have a bachelor's degree, which as a dependent student, I don't. But in the event I were to say yes, an additional question would display asking me if I'm pursuing an initial teaching certification at the elementary or secondary level. The purpose of that question is to allow a school to award Pell in the event that I am otherwise eligible for it, aside from already having a bachelor's degree. But again, I'm a dependent student, first year freshman, so I'm going to indicate no, I don't have a bachelor's degree, and I'm going to continue. So here we have a collection of questions that are very similar to questions that we have been asking for many years now. Is the student on active duty? Is the student a veteran? Does the student have children or other dependents, etc.? So you can see in some instances we've combined previous questions, and in other instances we have separated out individual criteria from one question into multiple questions. For example, the orphan, ward of the court, and foster care questions. Previously, they were all wrapped up into one question, and now they're 3 separate response options. So again, I'm a dependent student, so none of these apply. So I will indicate that none of these apply and select continue. This is a new, this is not a new question. This is a question that previously displayed on the online form only and not on the paper form. And it's just generally asking if the student is unaccompanied and either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. As a dependent student, I'm going to say no, but I just want to show you what the student would see if the answer is yes. There's a series of checkboxes that allow the student to indicate if they are unaccompanied and homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless, did any of these entities make that designation? If so, I would just select which applies. If none of these entities made that designation, but I do meet the criteria for being homeless or at risk of homelessness, then I would be considered a provisionally independent student. And as a provisionally independent student, I would be able to answer the remaining questions as though I were an independent student. All questions about parents would be hidden from me. And upon submitting the application, I would receive a provisional student aid index and information letting me know that I need to see my financial aid administrator in order to have them make a final determination as to whether I should be considered an independent student or not. So that's a new process. Previously, we had a web-only process to identify people who needed to go work with a financial aid administrator for a potential dependency override, but we handled things differently. On the website, we did not ask the independent only questions, and we also did not provide estimated eligibility information. So those are some changes that you'll see for the 2425 FAFSA form. But as a dependent student, I'm going to say no, and then I'll continue from here. This next question is asking if the student has any unusual circumstances that would likely lead to the financial aid administrator considering whether the student qualifies for a dependency override. Just as I explained on the previous screen, if the student answers yes to this question, they will be considered a provisionally independent student and go through that same process that I just described. But in my case, because I'm dependent, I'm going to say no and continue from here. And so this is the screen that tells me the results of my dependency determination. So the way that I answered the previous questions, I've been determined to be a dependent student, and a dependent student is required to provide parent information. So that's being communicated to me here. I do have the option to apply for only a direct unsubsidized loan if my parents are unwilling to answer their questions such that I can complete the form as a dependent student. So I have the option to indicate here that I want to apply for an unsubsidized loan only, but as a dependent student who is planning to have my parents contribute to this form, I'm going to say no. Just a note on this page that we do have multiple versions of this page. So what you're seeing is the version for a dependent student. If I were determined to be an independent student, there would be different information here, and this question about the unsubsidized loan only would not display. And also, if I were identified as a provisionally independent student, I would have different language here, and this direct unsubsidized loan only question would not display. Continuing from here takes me to what we're referring to as the Who's My Parent Wizard. So this is an interactive worksheet that helps the student to determine which parent or parents they should be planning to include on this FAFSA form. So you can see that we start by defining what we need by a parent. It's the student's legal, biological, or adoptive parent. And the first question that's asked is whether the parents are married to each other. If I say yes, they are, then I'll be told that I will need to provide information for both of my parents. If I say no, then the next question is asking me if my parents live together. If I say yes, then I'll be told that I need to provide information for both parents. If I say no, then I'll be asked if one of those parents provided more financial support than the other parent over the past 12 months. And depending on my answer, that will tell me which parent is the parent that's being referred to in the parent section of the form that we will be reviewing shortly. If both parents provided an exact equal amount of financial support, or if neither of them supported the student financially, I'm instructed to answer no. And then when I answer the next question, I'll be referring to the parent with the greater income or assets. If I say yes, then I'll be asked if the parent I identified in the previous question remarried. If I say no, I'll be getting that same question, but I'll have the additional information that's reminding me that I need to be thinking about the parent that had the greater income and assets. So if I say that that parent has remarried, then I'll be told to provide information for the parent and step-parent. And if I say that parent hasn't remarried, I'll be told to provide information just for that parent that I identified. So in this case, I'm going to say yes, and then I will continue. And here is where I will be identifying one or both of those parents to receive an invitation to join my FAFSA form, to come in and complete their portion of the form. So what we're trying to communicate on this page is that we're going to need information about both parents. You need to invite at least one of those parents to come in and log in and do their section of the form. You can identify both, because either of those parents can come in and log in and provide their information. And depending on how that parent answers questions, they may end up identifying the need for that second parent to come in as a contributor. But that's something we won't know until one of the parents comes in and logs in and starts answering the questions. I need to identify my parent or parents with their legal information, so whatever's on file at the Social Security Administration, if they have a Social Security number. But the email address that I'll be providing is one where I know that they will receive email, because they'll actually get an email invitation inviting them to come in and join my form. So I'm just going to enter some random information. And a random email address. And send an invite. And you can see here that it's letting me know that an invitation has been sent to Jane Smith, which is who I identified as my parent. Now this happens in real time, so I'm going to continue answering the student questions on the form, but in the meantime, my parent has received an email letting her know that she can come in and start filling out her portion if she'd like. I'm going to continue from here, and now we're moving into the student demographics section. So we start the student demographics section with questions asking about the student's gender and whether they're transgender. You can see at the top, we're very clear that these questions are being used for research purposes only. They don't have any impact on federal student aid eligibility, and we will not be sharing the answers with any of the schools that the student is applying to. So I'm going to go ahead and answer the questions and then move to the next screen, which has similar language at the top and is asking about the student's ethnicity and race. And you can see in the race section, as you select each option, there are multiple additional options underneath, as well as the option to type in something if you don't see listed what you want to share about your race. And you can select as many options as you'd like. I'm going to continue from this screen and report my citizenship status. If I indicate that I'm an eligible non-citizen, then I will enter my A number here. I'll continue. And here we're asking about the parent's education status. So did either of the student's parents attend or complete college? I'm going to answer this question and continue to the next screen, where I'm asked if if I have a parent that was killed in the line of duty. I'm going to say no and continue. And here's where I'll be asked about my high school completion status. So the response options are pretty much the same as prior years. However, if I choose state recognized high school equivalent, then I will be asked to indicate the type of equivalent that I received, as well as the state from which I received it. I'm going to indicate high school diploma so that we can take a look at the high school search functionality. We've made some changes to make this more user-friendly and hopefully improve the accuracy of the information that's reported. First question is asking me the state of my high school. And then you can see that rather than me having to type everything in like I did previously, I'm being given a list of options to choose from. And as I start actually typing, see that list will get smaller, and I should be able to actually choose what I want from the list rather than having to type in everything. Both state and city are required fields, and the high school name is optional, but recommended in order to shorten the search results list. I'm going to go ahead and leave it blank just so that you can see what the search list looks like. So it appears as though there's only one high school in Belen, Alaska, and that is Belen High. So I'm going to go ahead and select it and then continue from here. And here is where I can just take a look and make sure that I selected the correct high school, and then I will continue. So now we're moving into the finances section. Now, if you remember at the very beginning, I did provide my consent for the IRS to transfer my federal tax information directly into my FAFSA form. If I had declined, then I would be given another opportunity here to change my mind, because here is where my consent or lack of consent is really important, because here is where we are collecting the information from the tax return. If I haven't provided my consent, then I'll have to manually enter all of that information. Since I already provided my consent, I'm simply going to select continue. And these are the only questions that I am required to answer based on the conditions that I've met and the fact that the IRS directly transferred my federal tax information. So just these two questions, the first of which is required for us to ask, but optional for the student to report. And then the last question, which is the foreign earned income exclusion. So I'm just going to go ahead and enter a 0 for that. And then I will continue from here. Now, if I hadn't provided consent, or if I provided consent, but the IRS was not able to provide my tax information, then I would have some additional questions that I would be asked on a different screen to determine if I was a tax filer or not. And then this screen, if I was a tax filer, would have many, many, many more questions on it. But anything that we receive directly from the IRS as federal tax information, not only do we hide the answer to the question, but we hide the question itself. So you can see it's a much shorter screen than what people saw previously when they used the IRS data retrieval tool. I'll continue from here. And the next screen is collecting student asset information. So we do have the same 3 asset questions that we've had for the past many years. There have been some changes to the definitions, but the questions themselves are pretty much the same. I'm going to go ahead and just enter all zeros here and then continue. And I am now done with the financial section. So now I'm going to move into the section where I'll identify the colleges that I want my FAFSA information to be sent to. So I'll continue from here. And we've increased the number of schools that a student can list on their FAFSA form from 10 to 20. I'm not going to select all 20 colleges, but I can if I want to. I'm going to go ahead and search by school name. So similar to the high school search, I'll get my state list to select from, and then if I want to choose a city, I can do that. If I want to enter a school name, I can do that, but I'm going to go ahead and select search, and you can see the list of colleges that are in Arlington, Alaska, and I'm just going to select a few of them. You can see down at the bottom, it's letting me know how many schools I've selected so far. And then when I'm done, I can either do another search and select some more colleges, or I can continue. And I'm going to go ahead and continue. So this is the page that displays after I've made my college selections, and it's basically just summarizing the list of colleges that I selected. Obviously, these aren't the same colleges that I selected, but that's because this is a prototype and it's smart, but not quite that smart yet. What I do want to point out is the text in this green box, and this will vary depending on the state of legal residence that the students selected. For some states, the order in which the colleges are listed does matter. For some states, you need to have like a state institution in the first, 3 positions or something like that. For most states, the order doesn't matter. But previously, we required you to actively look at the rules for the different states to determine if order mattered for you. Now, what we'll be doing is providing those instructions directly on this page, depending on the state of legal residence that you chose. So if you chose a state where the order does matter, then you'll have the up-down arrows and you'll be able to change the order here. And if you chose a state where the order doesn't matter, you won't get these up-down arrows because the order doesn't matter. And so basically you'll just submit in the same order in which you selected the schools. I'm going to continue from this screen. And now we have an opportunity to review the information that was provided throughout the form. So you can see that for each section, we have the opportunity to expand it and see the questions that displayed as well as the answers that were provided. With the exception of the financial section, which will not show the federal tax information. And then down here at the bottom, we have information about contributors. So again, this is a prototype, so it's not reflecting exactly what I entered. I entered information for, I think it was Jane Smith. As my one parent, you can see here, there's an indication that I actually shared my application with 2 parents, Alcina Tran and Travis Tran. And very shortly, Kim will be playing the role of Alcina Tran and showing you all what the parent experience will be. But this allows the student to see that they did send, 1 or more invitations and what the current status is. As I mentioned, when I sent the invitation, the parent will receive it in real time and could come right in and start answering the questions there in their section. And if that's the case, I would see a different status here. But she hasn't started her section yet, so it's just indicating that the invitation has been sent. Continuing from this screen moves me into the section where I'll be providing my signature. So I have a summary of, all of the same general stuff we've communicated in the past. I promise I'm not lying about anything. Everything that I've reported here is accurate, all of that stuff. I'm going to indicate that I agree to the terms outlined. And then I'm going to sign. You'll note that it simply says sign. It doesn't say sign and submit, but I am basically wrapping my section up and calling it a day here. I'm going to sign, and then my section of information and my signature are all bundled up and waiting until my parent or parents come in to complete their section. And once the entire application is complete, that's when submission will be allowed. So this is letting me know that my section is complete. And it's letting me know what needs to happen next. And that is that the contributor that I've identified needs to come into the form and provide their information. And it lets me know next steps and things that I should be aware of. One other thing that I want to point out is that, as I mentioned previously several times, every contributor is required to provide consent. In the event that I, as the student who have completed my own section, wants to manually enter my parents' information, I can do that. It's not recommended because my eligibility will not be calculated because my parent's consent and signature will be missing. But if my parent is unable to come in and provide their information, then I can select this link and manually enter my parents' information and then submit the form. And it will process, but it will process as a rejected transaction. In this case, though, I have a very cooperative parent, and that's Alcina. And so at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Kim Wells, who's going to walk us through the process of completing the parent section.
Thanks, Misty. So again, like Misty mentioned, my name is Kim Wells, and I'm going to be walking us through the parent portion of Raya Tran's application. So you can see here that what I'm showing is the email that the parent that I, as Alcina, would have received once Raya had identified me in her FAFSA form as the parent that she wanted to send the invite to. So she would have provided my information, including the email address. And like Misty mentioned, once she's selected to send the invite, that happens automatically at that time. So that would send this email invite to me. And then I would hopefully soon at some point look at my email. And this is just a sample of what the email might look like. So it's an email basically explaining that, Raya can't be eligible for federal student aid without my input as a contributor. And so I need to help complete her FAFSA form by completing my section. So a couple of things that I'd like to point out about this email are, first of all, there's a big blue login button here. So as Misty mentioned, everybody who is going to be a contributor to a student's FAFSA form will need to have their own FSA ID, username, and password. And so I'll show you in a minute when I select the login button what happens there. But a couple other things that I wanted to point out are a couple of help topics that would be important when the parent gets this email. So the first one is this link here that's right after the don't recognize Raya question. So this would be a help topic where if for some reason, let's say Raya had inadvertently entered the wrong email address or something, and so someone accidentally got the email and they didn't know who Raya was, then by selecting this help topic here, they would be able to get instructions for what they would do in that circumstance. And then the other one that I wanted to draw your attention to is closer to the bottom. And this is a section here where it says can't find Raya's form. And from there, what that would be if someone tried to log in as they were invited. They understand who Raya is, like it's my daughter, I know who she is. I go in and I try to log in, but when I log in, my information isn't tied to Raya's form. And so this help article explains what people should do in that circumstance, how they can get that resolved. And so those are two important things that parents are going to want to be on the lookout for when they get their invite email. So at this point, then I'm going to scroll back up and choose the login button here. So I would select login, and then from here I would provide my username and password, and then I would choose the login button. So this is logging me into studentaid.gov. So once I log in, then I am taken to the My Activity portion of studentaid.gov. And so here we're explaining to the parent that Raya has identified them as a parent on the FAFSA form, and parents are required to provide their financial and demographic information, but that doesn't make them financially responsible for any of the federal loans that the student decides to accept. So we wanted to make sure that parents understand that just by providing their information on the form and being called a contributor does not then obligate them in any financial way for any of the loans that the student accepts. So there's two options here for the parent. There's the accept option and the decline. So if they do select the decline, then we trigger a message that explains why it's a good idea for them to go ahead and accept the invitation, but they do have the option for the decline and to return. So if I choose to go back, then it just takes me back to this page here. And then if I accept if I choose the accept invitation button instead, then it will take me into Raya's form. But first, it's explaining by accepting that invitation that I'm agreeing to share my information on the FAFSA form. So once I select continue from that modal message, then we will start the process of helping Raya complete the FAFSA form. So this first page here is just explaining to the parent that you've entered Raya's form, just giving some information about the fact that we need the parent's information in order for Raya to be eligible for federal student aid, and that, of course, the parent can save the form and come back to it later. Below that, there are some frequently asked questions that relate to what it means to be a contributor on someone's FAFSA form. So it includes like, why have I been invited? Does it mean I'm responsible to pay? What do I need in order to complete the sections? What happens after I complete them, etc. So the parent can choose these down arrows, and they'll see the information that's the answers to those frequently asked questions. So from here, I'll select the continue button, and then it takes me to similar information that you saw when Misty, as the student, did the onboarding screens. So there are similar onboarding screens here with a little bit of differences in terminology and what we're explaining to the parent. So the first is the opportunity for them to understand what the FAFSA form is. The second one just explains about contributors, and it talks to parents or spouse being a contributor, how the invite process happens, and then there's also an opportunity here for parents to select this down button here or down caret here to look at and see what information they may need to complete the form. So once they've had an opportunity to read through that page, they'll continue on to the third page of the onboarding, which just generally explains what they can expect, how long it might take, and a reminder that they need to provide their information, and without their consent, that Raya would not be eligible for federal student aid. Then they select the continue button to get to the last page of the onboarding, where we explain the similar things that we did to the student when the student went through their onboarding, just kind of explaining the processing and what happens next after the student's FAFSA form is processed. At that point, they are ready to start the FAFSA form. So they choose the Start the FAFSA form button, and the first page, you'll see that a lot of these pages for the parent look very similar to the pages that Misty displayed for the student. So in this first section here, the parent has the opportunity to review their information. and make sure that it's correct before they move forward. Just like for the parent, this information isn't editable in the form itself. So if any of this information is correct, they would need to change that information in their account settings by selecting the link here. And all of this information is carried forward or carried over from their FSA ID from when they logged into studentaid.gov. So then they'll provide their mailing address, city, state, and zip, and their country here, and then they would select continue. From here, this is where we are capturing the consent for the parent. So there's the summary information at the top, just like we had for the student. And then there's the text below that explains what the consent means, what they are agreeing to by providing consent for their information to be pulled from the IRS. And at the bottom, some frequently asked questions related to the consent process. So in this instance, I'm going to choose to approve and move forward by providing my consent on Raya's FAFSA form. The question that we go into is the parent demographics. So here we ask some questions of the parent that will indicate some of their demographic information. The first thing that we start with is the parent marital status. So here they're going to select that marital status that is applicable for them. So in our case, we know that the parents are married. So we're going to choose the married option here. And this is the one place where it's different. The marital status options are different between the student and the parent. So the parent has this additional option of unmarried and both legal parents living together. In our case, that is not their situation. They are married and not separated. So that's the option that we choose here. And then we choose the continue button. From here, we are collecting the student's the parent's state of legal residence. So I'm going to choose the down arrow here, and I'll just choose California. And then you'll see, just like for the student, then we require the month and the year for the parent when they became a legal resident of that state. So they would fill in that information, and then they would select the continue. And that's it for parent demographics. Pretty easy. For parent finances, we will go on to that section, and this is where then they're going to tell us some additional information about their financial situation. The first question that the parents receive are whether or not that they received any federal benefits in the previous 2 calendar years. So basically here, the parent is going to answer whether or not they received any of these federal benefits, them or anybody in their family, for any of these programs. And they would indicate which ones they had received benefits from, and if none of them applied, then they would choose the none of these apply option. And you can see once I select that option, then all of the other options are grayed out here. They'll choose the continue button from here, and then we ask them about their tax filing status. So on this page, we are asking, because these parents are married, we need to know whether or not the parent filed a joint tax return with their current spouse. So if they indicate yes, then they would move forward. If they indicate no here, then they would also be able to move forward, and that then informs the questions that we would ask for them subsequent to this page. There are 2 other questions that may display on this page for the parent, depending on their circumstances. The other 2 questions that may display here include whether they've filed or will file a Form 1040 or 1040 NR. And depending on their answer to that question, the other question that may display would be whether or not they filed a foreign tax return. So here I'm going to indicate yes, I did file a joint tax return with my current spouse, and I'm going to choose the continue button. At that point then, we are asking if the parent's family size is different from the number of people that were claimed on their 2022 tax return. So there you can see there are two options here, yes, and if they answer that, they would continue forward. If they answered no, then there's an opportunity for them to be able to tell us what their family size is. Here, pardon, I said that the wrong way. So if the parent's family size is different, then they get to tell us what their family size is. If their family size is not different, then they don't need to tell us what their family size is because it's not different. So if they answer yes to the family size question, then you can see that they would have an opportunity here to provide us with what their family size is. We'll ask them a question here, and then they would provide us what their family size is. So I'm going to answer no, that the family size is not different, which means it's the same as the number of people that were claimed on my 2022 tax return. And then I would say continue. From here then, we are asking about how many people are in the parent's family will be in college. So the parent would provide their answer here, and then they would choose the continue button. From there, we are asking about some information from the parent's tax return. So you can see that on this page, we are only asking a couple of questions here in this circumstance. So we're asking whether or not the parent received the earned income tax credit. So I'm going to say no here. And then we're asking two additional questions. One is the amount of college grants, scholarships, or AmeriCorps benefits reported as income to the IRS, and then the other is the foreign earned income exclusion. So in this circumstance for these parents, these are the questions that would display here. So I would provide answers to all of these questions, and then I would select the continue button. We have then moved on to assets for the parent. So here you'll see that there is an asset question that's asked of the parent that was not asked of the student, and that is related to the annual child support received. So the parent would answer that question and then also provide the three asset questions that are listed here: cash savings and checking, net worth of investments including real estate, and net worth of businesses and investment farms. Once they've answered those questions, then they would choose the continue button, and then there is an opportunity for them to provide information about the other parent. So one thing to note here is this is not inviting the other parent to this FAFSA form. Because these parents are married to each other and they filed a joint tax return with each other, with their current spouse, then we don't need to invite the second parent to the form, but we do need to collect information about the other parent. So they would provide the other parent's first name here, and their date of birth, and their social security number and email address. Once they have provided all of that, they would choose the continue button, and then they have finished completing all of the questions for the parent section. So here they have an opportunity to review their responses before they sign the form. So they can scroll through here. They can see that which sections were shared with other contributors. And then once they've reviewed their responses, then they would select the continue button here. At that point, they're going to have the opportunity to sign and complete their own section. So remember, this is the parent, so they've just completed their own parent section. And as you saw, it was, pretty straightforward. So they read all of the terms and conditions, just like the student did, saying that, I agree, I didn't provide any false information, everything is true and correct to my knowledge. And then they would select the checkbox, and then you'll see, different from the student's application or the student's portion of their application, this button says sign and submit. And the reason for that is because at this point, the FAFSA form has all of the required sections complete. So Misty showed you Raya completing her section of the form, and then I, as the parent, received my invite. I went in, I signed in, I affirmed that, to this application. I provided my consent. I answered all of the questions. And so all of the sections that need to be completed on this form have been completed. So the form is actually ready to be bundled together. So Raya's portion that Misty showed you will be bundled together with this portion that I'm showing you, and everything gets submitted to the FAFSA processing system for processing. So I choose sign and submit here. And then what you'll see here is a different version of the confirmation page than what the student would see. So this is an abbreviated version of the confirmation page. The parent doesn't need to see all of the information that the student does. It's the student's application, so the student needs to see more information than what the parent needs to see. So this is just an abbreviated version of the confirmation page that essentially tells the parent, congratulations, the FAFSA form is complete. Here's when it was completed, gives them some general information about what happens next. The student will get a confirmation email version of the confirmation page that has more information. The student, gets notified of the processing of the form, and then the student's schools that they listed on the form will reach out to them, determining their eligibility for federal aid. And then there's a section at the bottom that indicates to the parent that they can go back to their dashboard on studentaid.gov and take a look at the status of the student's application. And at that point, the student's form is complete and it's been submitted for processing, and the application is done. Okay, so you saw the abbreviated version of the confirmation page that the parent would see if they are the one who finishes their section and then submits the form as a whole for processing. So we wanted to make sure that you also saw the student version of the confirmation page because it has more information. The application is the student's application, and the information that's in the application belongs to the student. And so they get a little bit more information on their confirmation page than what the parent would. So this is what the student's version of the confirmation page looks like. So you'll see at the top, it looks similar. Some congratulations, student's name, completion date, just like you saw for the parent's abbreviated version. What you see on the student's version, though, is the data release number here. That's also known as the DRN, and the estimated student aid index. And then you also see information here where if the student meets certain criteria, then we'll tell them that they may be eligible for a federal Pell Grant. So none of that information was included on the parent's abbreviated confirmation page. As I scroll down, you'll see that the rest of this looks pretty similar. So we're still telling the student to check their email, that they'll get notification of the processing, and that they'll receive information from their school about what the next steps are and what their estimated eligibility is for federal aid. The student can also track and manage the status of their form by selecting this View Status button, and that would take them back to the dashboard on studentaid.gov where they can view the current status of their FAFSA form. And that concludes the walkthrough of the 2024-25 FAFSA form.
Thank you, Kim and Misty, for that wonderful demonstration on the 2024-25 FAFSA online process. For the most up-to-date information on FAFSA simplification, check out the FAFSA simplification page on the Knowledge Center and be sure to subscribe. We have had a busy summer, but if you've missed any of the presentations or just want a refresher, you can rewatch them on the FSA Training Center. I also want to let you know about an additional training opportunity that we are working on. We've decided to put together a recorded session that will focus on the most frequently asked about topics based on the hundreds of questions you've submitted to recap some of the guidance we've given so far and to go into a little more depth as needed. This will not be a live webinar, but rather a video that you can access and watch on the FSA Training Center. We are working to get that put together for you this fall, and we will notify the community when it's available.